I'm so impressed. Good morning, and welcome to Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church, in-person and online worship. Whether today is your first time here or you've been coming for years, we're so glad that you are with us. My name is Rick Kimball, my pronouns are he and him, and I'm serving as this morning's worship associate. We are growing a community that transforms lives through the power of love. Our mission calls us to celebrate diversity, encourage spiritual growth, and promote social responsibility while we travel on and care for the earth. A special welcome to those at home who are joining us on Zoom today, perhaps more than usual because you are trying to escape the marathon trap that has slowed some people getting here today. If you're attending for the first time on Zoom, please go to our website and fill out the welcome card so we can know more about you. We are excited to welcome our guest minister today, the Reverend Paul Langston-Daly. Reverend Paul serves as the Minister of Social Action at First Parish in Concord, Massachusetts, consulting minister for the Community Unitarian Universalist Church in White Plains, New York, and as a consultant in restorative practices with congregations and communities. He is a busy man. We are grateful to have him here today. You will be cheered to know that I do have several announcements. We have reserved signs, excuse me. Excuse me. There's a frog that lives in the bog down there by the top. And he likes to wait for me every Sunday morning. Anyway, we have reserved signs in the back row for people who may be running late. Please leave those open at the beginning of the service. A reminder that this Thursday at 2 o'clock, the Climate Group will be hosting a discussion on staying afloat emotionally in the rising tide of climate change. This Tuesday, October 8th, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. on Zoom, there will be a workshop on gender identity and pronouns led by Reverend Elizabeth Mount. There is a registration link and Zoom link in the e-news and on Breeze. The registration form has a space for you to write questions you'd like answered or topics you'd like covered. Attendance is highly encouraged, especially for those struggling with the shift to using they/them pronouns for our minister. This will be a judgment-free zone. And finally, from the Social Justice Committee, join us today after church for our final letter-writing campaign, this time to Florida voters. It's from 11:15 on in rooms 7 to 9. Now we invite you to take this opportunity to silence your cell phones so that we may fully present to each other. And after the service, please grab a cup of coffee or tea in the kitchen window and stay for conversation, or head down to the end of the long hallway to join a group of people for the brown bag lunch. Those on Zoom may stay on and connect with one another. And now, let us center our hearts and minds with the ringing of the chimes.
Good morning. It's good to be here today. Our opening words are from Thomas Merton. He writes, "We are living in the greatest revolution in history, a huge, spontaneous upheaval of the entire human race. Not a revolution planned and carried out by any particular party, race, or nation, but a deep elemental boiling over of all of the inner contradictions that have ever been. A revelation of the chaotic forces inside of everybody. This is not something that we have chosen, nor is it something we are free to avoid. Welcome.
As we light our sanctuary chalice this morning, those worshiping at home are invited to light a chalice or candle near you to connect us more deeply with one another. We gather as leaders, as servants. We gather as ears, as voices. We gather as memory, as hope. We gather as family, as pilgrims. We gather as faithful, as skeptics. We gather as objects, as subjects. We gather as wisdom, as folly. We gather as action, as reflection. We gather as many, as one. As we are, we shall be. As we serve, so shall we lead.
And we light our community candle this morning as a candle of witness, marking tomorrow the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas and the beginning of the genocide in Palestine. The beginning of, in the words of the nation, 1 year of bloodshed and horror in the land that stretches from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Let us take a breath together.
Our opening hymn this morning is number 155, Circle Round for Freedom in the Gray Book, and up on the screen. Dale will play it through once, and then you're invited to rise and join in singing. We'll sing the hymn through twice.
In a few moments, some of us will leave the sanctuary for religious education programming. But first, I invite our lamplighter, Derek, to join me in the pulpit. Dexter. Not your dad, sorry. A lamplighter is entrusted to transfer the light of the sanctuary chalice to the lamp and then go forth to RE spaces where they will light the chalices there. I invite those going to RE to follow the lamplighter as we carry the flame, expanding our sacred space.
So I invite you to just settle in, take a deep breath, maybe two. And I offer this meditation this morning. This is a charm for hope. The first thing to do is to tie a string around your finger. Remember that you are not alone. Think of the ways that our best shared futures are braided inextricably with our own past and our own destiny. The second thing is to untie the string and let the knots and tightness fall away. Let the burden of bleakness roll off your shoulders. Resistance on these opaque horizons only requires one source of strength, one ray of light. Remember that persistence doesn't require all the answers up front, only one. Fortunately for all of us, we have one response: to remain together through awkward times and happy ones. And remember, we find ourselves in resolve, and we find our resolve in one another. Amen, and blessed be.
Now is the time in our service when we engage in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts support the ministries of this congregation and our work in the broader community. Each week, 1/3 of our offering is given away to a local nonprofit organization doing work to advance our shared values. This month's Share the Plate recipient is Musan, the Maine Unitarian Universalist State Advocacy Network, a statewide advocacy and public policy network anchored in UU faith. Donations can be made now as the basket is passed to the donate button in our website, or if you are a member, on Breeze, remembering to make note that your gift is for Share the Plate. If you are visiting us for the first time this morning, please know that your presence is your gift to us. At this time, our offering will be collected and gratefully received.
reading this morning is actually from a UUA leader resource that quotes a little bit from James Luther Adams. During his so-named conversion experience in Germany, Adams said he gained the conviction that a decisive institution of the viable democratic society is the voluntary association. Adams characterized his experience in Nazi Germany as inducing a kind of conversion in him that brought about his plunge into a host of civic-minded, voluntary associational activities when he returned to the United States. He claimed that such associations are a medium for the assumption of civic responsibility. Adams further argued, a religious congregation is a voluntary association that attends to the psychological well-being of its members, as well as to the organization and direction of their collective behavior for promoting social, political, and economic change in the wider world. Adams explains, voluntary associations are organizations to which we have freely chosen to belong, rather than those into which we were born, such as birth, family, community, or political state. Adams insisted that it is the voluntary associations that we gain, it is in those voluntary associations that we gain the power to negotiate our internal feelings with others, and also gain the power as a group to negotiate changes in the non-voluntary associations that rule our lives. That was a lot. I'm going to unpack that. So hold that while we listen to the choir. I imagine that you all are aware that there is an election coming up. And while I'm interested in working for electoral politics and working to promote progressive values, I want more moral engagement than just once every 4 years. And today I want to talk a little bit about how we can make deeper changes to the current situation that we find ourselves in so that we can sustain and support our democracy more effectively. As an organizer, I've come across a lot of models for social change, models that think about how to shift the culture from the place that it is to the place that it should be. And this tension between the world as it is and the world as it should be is constant. And it's the seed of our ideological political parties. Imagining the world as it should be is not the same for everyone. King George certainly had a different opinion about the colonies than those who settled here. And one need only take a quick look at Project 2025 to see the stark differences in our current worldviews. In progressive circles, the world as it should be cares for as many people as possible. It recognizes the interdependence and the interconnection, and it invites us to be part of the process for change. In UU language, and I'd like to think that we have some consensus around this, because we know there is no one UU language, but I'd like to think that we can agree the world that we dream of is a world where people seek to place love at the center. In many of our congregations, this is the kind of world that we imagine together and try to create as best we can, mostly imperfectly. But it's why our important is so welcome, and why that welcome must be backed up by the real world co-creation of the world that we imagine we want to live in. These kinds of changes require both vision and action. And there are real world examples of this working. And the thing to note is that the progressive values that we share are often addressed both internally and externally if we're going to make a change. How many of you have ever heard of Lucy Stone? Oh, we got a couple. Woohoo. All right. Lucy Stone. How many of you have heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton? Susan B. Anthony? Okay. So Lucy Stone and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony all worked together for women's suffrage. But the reason many of you have never heard of Lucy Stone is because she didn't go out and make speeches and do all the things. She was married to a senator. And so she would invite the other senators to dinner. And they would come with their wives, and they would have dinner together. And as they were sitting at dinner in this captive audience, she would explain to them why women need the vote. She worked internally within the system to try to shift the system. And you have Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony pressing on the outside to shift the system from the outside. So you have both forces working together. Stacey Abrams found her place working outside the system. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is working within the system. And I don't know how many of you heard, but when she first went to orientation for government, she was surprised to see that it was funded and driven and done by the lobbyists. But how exactly do we create change? This is the real question, right? I've been working in organizing for more than 20 years, and I'm always learning new things. But one model that has stuck with me and has really made a difference in my life is this model that's called the three-sphere model. And I like this model because it's both simple and quite complex, like most good models I've come across. So I'm going to ask you to imagine, if you will, a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles. You got that? Okay. One of those circles, the first circle, we'll call that the civic sphere. This sphere includes the voluntary institutions that James Luther Adams was talking about. These are groups and organizations that we join voluntarily. Unions, clubs, churches, low competition sports teams or in any other kind of voluntary organization you might be part of. When I was growing up, we had groups like my parents were involved in Bridge Club and Scottish dancing and all kinds of activities that were part of their social structure in the community. And I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, and every year they would plan an event. They planned this big spring festival event. And they would get together, these families, the adults would get together, and they would talk about how to do this event. And in their planning, they discussed more than just the event. They talked about their shared values and their common goals. They negotiated the stuff that they had differences of opinions about. They worked together for the good of the community and for the children. And these conversations sometimes led to discussions about politics. And they found common ground and core values and places where they could meet each other. The second sphere is the government sphere. This is the visible part of our democracy. Elected officials, policy making, law crafting, shaping the culture through legal and policy-based decisions. Government is here to support the people and the society in which those people live. The government sphere is responsible for regulation of both individuals and corporate or market forces. It's responsible for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as we understand it. This model is most effective, the sphere is most effective when people can influence the outcomes of elections, right? And that leads to a balance of corporate and community needs. The government supports workers in an effort to maintain some semblance of fairness, and this includes the support of unions. It's also government's job to regulate industry that have long proven that they are unable to regulate themselves. And the final sphere is the market sphere. This sphere was originally designed to create goods and services necessary to support civil society and includes innovation. The market is made up of corporations that are designed to make a profit in American capitalism, and they're designed to make a profit at any and all costs. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the United States, CEOs can be sued by their shareholders for failing to make a profit, which means they must externalize as much as possible in the way of costs and maximize profits as much as possible, no matter the costs. Like any good three-legged stool, these spheres have to be kept in balance or the thing won't stand. In the 1980s, these circles began to shift. The government circle came under attack first, quickly followed by the decline of civic society. Some of you will remember this. Ronald Reagan and his administration famously said, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." They imagined a different world, as it should be. They slashed budgets, including federal assistance to states, by 60%. Dramatic cuts that funded government. They sought to dismantle the Department of Education. They fired government workers and undermined the ability of government to regulate business. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration undermined unions with the greatest success since the 1930s. They fired all of the air traffic controllers. Workers who were striking because they were concerned that they were working too many hours in an extremely stressful situation. They wanted more employees, better time off, better pay. Lives depended on them being at their best, and still do. If you fly, you know this. Reagan declared their strike illegal and fired every one of them. We still haven't recovered from that. And it signaled the end of government support for workers, and unions have been in decline ever since. Businesses were encouraged to merge and cut wasteful spending, and many found themselves working twice as many hours for half as much pay or less. Just happy to have any job, because I don't know if you remember the 80s. but it was bad. The consolidation of the 80s ensured compliance through threat of lost work. Markets expanding their power. Since then, our lives have only become more complicated. As government uses the business model of externalization to cut expenses and costs, what happens to those costs? You and I bear those costs. Civic society does. Individuals who can least absorb these costs are the ones who are most expected to pay them. People are now working twice as many hours or more than one job just to make ends meet. Education reforms begun under Reagan and Bush have externalized activities that were once core to education. If you're a parent, you know this. They're not teaching music in the schools anymore. There's no art. Physical education, you got to take your kids on Sunday morning to soccer, which means you have to decide between church and physical education for your kids. Parents have to find time to shuttle their kids to programs outside of school hours that were once core to the curriculum. Corporations have, through layoffs and consolidations, required longer hours of their employees, and now this is on all the time. And I'm not the only one. Since the 1980s, the government has shrunk. And by design, so has the power of civic society. Let's go back to our Venn diagram for a minute. Think about that. What happens when you have 3 circles and 2 of them shrink? The market takes over. It gets bigger. It subsumes government, it subsumes civil society. The market sphere is the sphere that's supposed to be providing goods and services to us. But it seems its only purpose now is to make bucket loads of money for the owners and stockholders at any and all costs to you and I. The pressure on the civic society and the government sphere is apparent. Less pressure on government to change things. We have less impact. Our protests have less and less impact. Fewer people are running for office. Who wants to get run through that ringer? Less time for the work of society as people manage the high stress of just being able to maintain employment. And just getting by day to day is enough for most people. Engaging in democracy, that is just a bridge too far. And not how people want to spend their precious downtime. When we lose the ability to right-size the market forces, forcing that externalization back into the market sphere, we all suffer. And the good news is we can actually change this. This is not a foregone conclusion. There was a surge in voluntary organizations when the previous administration came to power. Surge, Black Lives Matter, Democracy Defenders, as well as other types of transparently political organizations came out of the awareness that things are only going to get worse if we don't find a way to shift it. The past few years, these groups have continued to explore and expand the deeper need for connection and civic engagement. And this huge increase comes as people try to push back against this ideology that looks more like feudal times than modern democracy. The quiet quitting that happened over the last few years is also a reset, a way of civic society informing the markets that there is actually a limit to how much we will tolerate. And voluntary organizations are really, really good for our health. They're good for our well-being. This requires that we have time for them. And we're beginning to make time for these organizations once again. And I'm thrilled by this because this is how we strengthen our society. Sewing groups, sporting events, even card games, even to some extent identity groups that we're involved in. Groups that aren't necessarily political, but groups that bring us into connection with one another, where we can talk in low-stakes environment about what's going on, about our values, about what we believe in, about how we think the world should be. We learn about our neighbors and friends. We understand more intimately the impact of the choices made by our government, whether it's local or national. We learn to listen, to disagree with respect, to move and be moved, because the relationships matter to us. And it seems we have, and I hope it's true, hit a tipping point. And even someone who's working 3 jobs is finding time to engage in civic society. Together, those working for a sane and responsible democracy are finding voice, and hundreds of thousands, millions, are now appearing to listen. By strengthening the civic sphere, we give ourselves voice. We strengthen the power of the government, and that in turn pushes back on the market and makes it right-sized. In his writings, James Luther Adams said, "We can only imagine the world as it should be together, in dialogue with others. And we can only bring that vision of the world as it should be if we engage with others and co-create the world we dream about through compromise, collaboration, and collective care. With active listening, curiosity, empathy, and at the very least, tolerance for difference." The regulation of the market is vital for us, not just to survive, but to thrive. The damage to our planet is real. Our relationships, our lives depend on these interconnections and the influence we have in our government sphere to make those changes happen. Now, like most churches, I imagine some of you come here for purely social reasons, because this is where your friends are. But know that by being part of this congregation, you're doing more than that, even if you don't realize it. By simply being part of this congregation, you have cast your lot with so many others who believe in the progressive, liberal, religious values which include justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, and all of it with love at the center. We know that when we raise our voices with others, we can make a mighty roar. And I put my lot in with those who want to make things better for more people, not fewer. With effort and commitment, we can change the world. As Reverend Soto writes, "Remember that persistence doesn't require all the answers up front, only one. Fortunately for all of us, we have one response: to remain together through awkward times and happy times. We remember, and we find our resolve in one another." May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. And I invite you to join in our closing hymn number 323, "Break Not the Circle." I expect this is not a hymn that you're familiar with, so I'm going to ask Dale to play it through. And I know that there's some challenging language, and I apologize that I did not make corrections for that. I think it's in the 3rd stanza, so bear with it. My apologies for not making that correction. Thank you. Please rise in body and spirit. closing words, I know you have a thing that you normally say, but I want to say this first. These are the words of Octavia Butler. She writes, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change." Our worship has ended, and our service begins.